have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron.
Howdy.
Howdy, and happy Halloween to ya.
Yeah.
Yep, this episode will be coming out on Halloween, so obviously we're recording a little bit before then, but just want to give happy holidays to everyone today. How you feeling so far with, Halloween coming up, soon to be here?
I'm excited. Spooky dooky.
Spooky dooky. Well, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah, I've been really busy since I've been doing Little Shop of Horrors there. But anytime I ever can get a chance to really bask in the spookiness of the month, I definitely take my time to do so. Which is why I am very eager and excited to visit this film, Trick or Treat. And so, as previously kind of mentioned towards the end of the last episode, you had mentioned you had never really heard anything about it. Maybe you had seen the Burlap Sack Boy.
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, he looked like this right here.
Yeah, he looked kind of familiar.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the iconic character of the movie here. But aside from that, any thoughts or anything are kind of going in with blank slate?
Pretty blank. Pretty much anything I can gather is from the title. So I'm guessing this is about, it probably takes place on Halloween. Probably in some fucking New England neighborhood. Probably some kids trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treat, smelling feet, and getting something good to eat.
Well, you're pretty freaking close. You're like right there, exactly. So pretty much you're getting a lot of stuff right just from the title alone. But yeah, I might as well talk about my experience since I do have prior exposure to Trick or Treat. So Trick or Treat was not really one of those films I even heard about, even whenever it released in 2007, straight to DVD. I didn't hear anything about it, but I started seeing the character Sam pop up more and more, and people I followed, started talking about it more and more. And it wasn't until 2016, whenever my wife and I were dating, that on Halloween night we decided to watch Trick or Treat. And I won't spoil anything whatsoever, but let's just say I'm definitely glad I chose to watch that film on Halloween. Yes. That's pretty much what I'll tease for you in a bit here. But I mean, aside from that, didn't really know anything about it. But I've always wanted to talk about this film for a long time on a podcast, and so I'm finally excited now that I was able just to have a good schedule line up to where I'm able to talk about it. So we don't have too much else to say. Be sure to get your goodie bags and stay tight, because we'll be back after we're watching Trick or Treat.
Yeah, remain tight.
Yes, tight. Don't loosen the seatbelt. That's unsafe.
No,
it's not cool. That's just scary bad. And we are back from watching Trick or Treat. And so, Aaron, initial thoughts on Trick or Treat. I didn't mean to hype it up too much, but it's just like something that I can't help myself that I've been excited to visit.
Yeah, I just got done eating a handful of candy, so I'm gonna get my radio voice on.
Yeah,
no, that was fun. It was a good time. You're right. I have seen that character before. Right after we watched the movie, I went and took a leak in your bathroom, and he's on the mirror. So,
yeah. It's like a little window cling, and with my house, I was like, I don't know where to put it. I'm like, I'm putting it in the mirror.
He was watching over me.
Yeah,
I respected the rules of Halloween, so he didn't murder me or whatever. I don't know. I was eating a lot of candy.
Did you check it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's probably why you're safe.
Yeah, I checked it. I removed the razor blade. I ate the razor blade first, as is the protocol, and then I ate the rest of the candy.
Okay.
So, and then you finish it off with the rainbow fentanyl. So.
Man, I'm glad you got a whole process down and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll dive into the nitty gritty of it. But first, just to give a general overlay, if you will, looking at it. And so, Trick or Treat is a film from 2007 that's basically an anthology film where it has I would probably say 4 stories that are fairly interwoven together, very loosely.
Yeah.
But you see loose connections there. And whenever I watched it the first time, I did not know it was an anthology film.
Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting because, surprisingly, this is only my second time watching the film. It's been one of those things that it's like, I always want to watch it, but I have so many films to watch that I'm like, okay, I can keep watching this one film or watch something new. And so it's, like I said, it's been, good golly gosh. How long ago? Yeah, about 6 years ago since I've last seen it. So it's been a long time, and gotta be honest, I need to make it a lot shorter because after watching this film the second time, I think I love it even more. It may... some of the initial surprises it has were definitely lessened because I kind of knew the big reveals, because there's a lot of big reveals in Trick or Treat there.
Because there's kind of, all those little stories happening more or less at the same time, and you kind of get little peeks at one or the other, but then, there's a lot of, like, this was happening because of this,
Definitely something I was not prepared for watching it the first time through. And watching it the second time, I was really paying attention just to see if I could pick up on all the small details they throw, or, like, hints of stuff, and just basically just looking at everything. I mean, there's so much to digest in this film, and it's quite frankly really just wonderful there. But I feel like, I guess it's kind of weird because this is our first anthology film we've reviewed on the podcast, I believe.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we've definitely watched films that have, like, kind of multiple things going on at once, and they cut back and forth. But yeah, this is the first one that had, like, fairly distinct narratives that were all tied just because they were happening, like, largely, like, zoomed out because they were happening in the same town on the same night. But you kind of, as the movie goes along, you get to see how they're all connected. Yeah, and so it's definitely going to be interesting trying to dive into it, because I feel like it's not just one story to look at, but it's like several others, and just trying to compare it. And I feel like, in all honesty, all the stories are fairly good. Like, I might like certain stories better than others, because I feel like my issue is, and this might put me in the hot seat there, but typically with anthology films, I sometimes have a hard time watching it, because I don't know if you've ever seen an anthology film where it's just kind of like, tells one story, beginning, end, and then usually has a narrator weaving the story together, doing that. And granted, I'm used to watching some sort of anthology. Usually my favorite is the Treehouse of Horror series from The Simpsons, where it's just like, short little anthology stories with like gags. But usually whenever I watch other anthology stories, it's really kind of a mixed bag. Like, I watched All Hallows Eve recently, which is another anthology film, and I think it's okay. That's my review of it. If we talk about it, it'll probably be maybe years later. I'm not sure. But overall, it was okay. And, coming back to revisit this film, it just kind of showed like how strong an anthology film is. And so Michael Dodry, hopefully I'm saying his name correctly. I really love the way he directed this film. Because he just kept me invested in it. And while there is weak moments in some of the stories, I would say, or oversights, it never like fully pulls me out of it there. Because that's kind of the bad thing with anthology films, is like, if you don't like the story, you're going to get another one, but at the same point, it's just like kind of sitting through there. Right, because then it could be like, well, here's a quarter of the movie that I just
because it has less time to have a satisfactory wrap up.
Right.
So I feel like this film does a good job, in my opinion, at least, having somewhat of an ending to each of the stories there, while also making it not feel like, okay, the movie ends here. It's just like little story moments. And so I think the way that it was done in this film is so artistically done, in a sense that, it doesn't pull you out, but you feel like you get that conclusion at the same time.
Right.
But I'm sure we'll talk about it more. But did you have any favorite of the 4 stories that were told at all, Aaron?
Some of them. So as we started getting going, because it took me a little while to realize this was an anthology as well. You know, and so sometimes you kind of dive into the second story or something, and I'd be like, okay, what does this have to do with the thing that we just watched? Until it started to become clearer. So, it was an interesting ride for me to be like, oh, okay, and how does this connect to the last? How does it? Because there's little moments of each story that sort of start out the other story. Whether it's the trick-or-treating kids looking for jack-o'-lanterns for UNICEF, stopping by the principal's house or whatever, and those 2 stories connect. Or really, the principal's at the center of a couple stories. He kind of sees what happens to the old man neighbor next door a little bit. And all of them seem to have the little trick-or-treat guy. Does he have a name?
Yes, his name is actually Sam.
Oh, Sam. Okay, Samheim or whatever.
It's funny because that's exactly what he's named after, named after that holiday. Because again, Sam kind of represents the spirit of Halloween, as you could probably pick up on.
Yeah, and he was cool, and it was kind of cool that he was there and in all the stories, and you really didn't figure out what the point of him was, or what he was doing behind the scenes or whatever, until the last kind of story. But I don't know that I had a favorite. If I had to pick, probably maybe the kids going to the quarry or whatever.
That's a really good one.
Yeah,
that's a really good one there. So I can't disagree with that. I probably would say, if I had to choose a favorite, in order, if I'm ranking the stories, the kids would probably be number 1 for me. I just feel like the whole story with that, I mean, it's everything captures the essence of Halloween for sure, but that one especially there, especially whenever they're walking over to the quarry there, passing by a little pumpkin patch there, and it just, again, with Halloween, you see a lot of the time, a lot of more kids being into it there, because as people get older, sometimes they're oh, too old for it. And so it just kind of reminded me of something kids would do together.
Right.
And
I feel like that one had the most character development too, because you kind of get to see these characters, and then you see what these characters are really up to, and then and in a short amount of time they sort of get developed, and then but at the same time it's also it's it is really kind of the raw spirit of Halloween, and they also develop a lot of the lore that becomes really important for some of the other stories in that story.
Because I think that's the brilliant thing about it, is that again, as a viewer, you're able to watch these stories and they mention stuff, so that way whenever you watch another story that honestly is barely connected, you already have that information on hand, and so if something weird happens, you have more context as to what's going on. And I think that's just really, really well done, in my opinion. And so I feel like that's one of this movie's biggest strengths there. To quickly go through the rest of the rankings, like I said, I'm sure we'll talk about it more in detail, but second favorite is probably the very last story with Mr. Craig's. I believe. I thought that was just well done, and it's Mr. Krieg. That was my bad. I got 2 G's instead of 2 E's. Woo! But I thought that was good, and then I thought the principal story was just fun. I thought he was a funny character. Yeah, I thought it was a good story to open up with. Because again, this film does jump narrative a bit back and back from the story there, but it's never too much. I feel like there's a specific time and place they tell each of the story. Just sometimes you get little windows as to oh yeah, they're doing this right now,
right,
and letting you know. And then the final one is with all of the friends at the end that are trying to look for dates. I felt like that one was good, but like, if I'm being critical of the film, I did feel like there was a few weak points there, but I do like a lot of the ideas.
I agree with you there. I feel like it was fairly one track. They kept coming back to it, and it's just like, we're trying to get dates, and then for this Halloween party, and then it was like, ooh, there's a twist. This is what the Halloween party was. Ooh, and it's I liked it. I enjoyed it, but that would have been my criticism too. Is it was kind of one track compared to the other ones, especially when you compare it to something like the the old dude or whatever. It just had a lot of complexity to it, and it drew in a lot of background information that you saw at other parts of the movie, and then was like spiced it in there.
Which again, like I say, it's my least favorite, but it's not like it was bad by any means. I feel like most anthology films, especially because I've seen a few, it's hard whenever you have a group of stories, and it's hard not to compare them to each one. I mean, it's like, heck, I do that with The Simpsons all the time with the Treehouse of Horrors, trying to figure out which one's my favorite. I'm like, well, this is my favorite segment, but my favorite episode.
Yeah.
So,
and the beauty of an anthology like this is, definitely how we find in the point where they bleed together and they do influence the other stories. But...
Yeah. This is actually kind of crazy, talking about how complex the plot has been kind of like interwoven together. Usually a lot of times I'm just like, yeah, there's a bad guy killing people.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really, it's been a good change of pace there. Not to say that slashers get like dry or boring. Again, it's my favorite thing, but having a story like this really kind of excites me. So I won't get into too much detail about the stories there, but just know that's at least my ranking of the stories overall there. All of them are super great, and obviously one thing that does make the stories stand out pretty strong is the fact that a lot of the characters, I mean, they're not fully complex because, again, they're not given time, but then again, we're kind of used to them not having a lot of development there, but at least they're developed enough to where you get an idea of who they are and what they are in the story. So I think that's one thing I can really appreciate. So yeah, I guess I'm trying to think. I guess this is so weird to tackle which characters. I guess we could talk about like the principal, because we've already mentioned that before.
I think there's a few that are probably more important than others. The principal does show up in a few stories, or like as a key character in a few stories. He's he's one of the houses that people are going trick or treating at. He is the principal of the local school, you come to know, and he has a bit of a quirky personality that covers up his let's say diabolical deeds that he's doing within his home.
And I'm just realizing something. I'm having like a moment of like, wait, like trying to think about it, because I'm looking at the cast and
trying to figure out who played the principal.
Yeah, because it's him, right?
Yeah. That's
well,
it's gotta be that guy.
Well, see, this is like my first like epiphany about this here, but Cole, edit this part out because I really have to talk to Aaron about this. We're back. So Aaron and I have discussed something, and he noticed something that I didn't notice that we definitely cannot talk about. Until spoilers. So sorry about the intermission there, but like I just had the biggest brain fart of my life just putting two and two together, and that's so good. That's so good. Anyways, let's talk about the principal. I feel like he does a really good job, although it is funny with him. I don't know what it is. I'm getting mad, Stephen Colbert vibes from him.
A little bit. Yeah, he's got that sort of like, he's playing the straight man, but the straight man that he's playing isn't all right up there, kind of guy. He's got that like, well, I'm a comically white American dad kind of vibe.
Yeah. It's so funny with him because he's so entertaining to watch with how derogatory he is. You always feel like he's talking down to you a lot, which again kind of matches up with a lot of typical principal vibes there, but I think it just helps make the story even more entertaining. Because I mean, aside from one moment in one of the stories, this is probably the most wackiest.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say so. Just overall, just because all of the things he does and the whole story revolves around. I mean, his introduction is he walks in and there's this fat kid that's been like knocking over pumpkins and being a delinquent, and he's eating all the candy out of his basket while he's not home, and I can't remember what that kid's name is, but he's like, oh, it's probably not good for your diabetes now, is it?
Yeah.
It's like, nah, sit down, kid. Just sits down and like badgers him. It's just yeah, and his story's pretty simple, I'd say. At least his story, but how he sort of influences other stories, it makes him more of a complicated character. Even though his character himself is just like, I love Halloween. We're gonna do some Halloweeny things, and they're like a little more dastardly than you might think.
Yeah, I really like it because again, like they gave this character where there's more kind of you learn about this character more and more. It's like initially whenever he confronts the fat kid, that's going up to the porch and, it says like, take one piece, we're not home. And he's just like, horking it down there. And he's just like, think you've had enough, just standing there. And he's like, oh yeah, why don't you have a seat there?
Right.
And as opposed to being like, hey, get out of that candy, you damn kid. No, instead it's just pretty much like, oh, hey, what's up? Like he was just prepared for something like this to happen. And he has a really good monologue, I would say, again, that's both like calm yet threatening, I would say, about it whenever he's talking to it. So again, we could talk more about what happens, but I feel like he does a good job driving his part of the story there. And I will say the ending the first time I saw it, were you expecting that ending for his part, like the first story there?
Oh, the ending of his story?
Yes, whenever, because...
No, I could say no, I didn't expect that ending. I mean, I knew he was up to something that was not as it seems, but I didn't realize it was that involved with his, because he's got a little kid. I didn't realize it was all like in the same vein.
Yeah, it's funny too, because the entire time, an incident, without spoiling anything, an incident happens to the principal during that first story, and basically he's trying to cope and deal with it. Meanwhile, his kid's coming out screaming like, I want to carve the pumpkin.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, can I go to the parade? He's like, no,
Yeah, so it's definitely the most funniest, I would say, out of all of them.
And then the neighbor here, because the neighbor's dog comes over, and he's trying to get the neighbor's dog to shut up so the neighbor doesn't come. And then the neighbor peeks over the fence. It's like, what's going on over there? And he's like, oh, I'm just in the backyard. He's just trying to get by for most of his story. Yeah,
definitely, for sure. And so it's definitely kind of interesting just to see, like, how kind of wacky the whole situation is comparatively to the story. But again, I feel like it just fits in with the mood. Like, I don't feel like it was ever too distracting how comedic it would get at some points with the, dark comedy there. So again, it's really hard just to tip. There are so many spoilers on the ground. We're taking little skips, hops, and jumps over them. So I think we've talked about them. We might as well talk about the kiddos here. So we have a lot of the kids here who again, you see throughout like the beginning of the movie there, because they stop at the principal's house because they're trick-or-treating, like you mentioned, they said like, oh, can we take a pumpkin, we're on a scavenger hunt. And then as it turns out, you find out later that they're getting together with the group of friends to leave. And I feel like overall, like the friend group wasn't like too miraculous there, but I felt like, again, you got the point of each character, because whenever you first initially see them, you see like the blonde girl, you see her, and you could tell she's kind of the leader of the group there.
She's the leader. She's kind of portrayed as like the goody two shoes, and then you find out later she's actually part of some sort of plot to do something else with the pumpkins besides donate them to UNICEF. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so you see them going around doing all that stuff there, and then you have her friend who's kind of like the one that typically folds in, because she's like, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. Then you have her like little brother, I guess.
Yeah.
He's dressed as a pirate.
Yeah. And, again, he's just like the typical little brother that you would see with everyone there. And then later up, they meet with this boy.
They're not really clear on what his relation is, but he's probably like a boyfriend or just a friend or something. I don't know. But he's a boy that's like the age of the leader of the group, and he's the only one that sort of pushes back at times.
Then whenever they pick up Rhonda, who's like kind of like the weird girl, and you already know that they kind of pick on her early on, and so you're just kind of curious of like, okay, why are they picking her up there? And so she decides to tag along, and I feel like Rhonda, the actress who played Rhonda, did a really good job of acting like the weird kid without like seeming like she's obnoxious or anything. It's just, you could tell that she's just an awkward kid. And so I think it worked out perfectly, and the other kiddos do a good job. Like, I don't feel like they pull too many surprises where you feel like any of them are out of character. You feel like you get a get-go of their character from the beginning there. Macy's definitely the confident one kind of leading the group. Chip, again, is just the little brother kind of running around there. And then Sarah, I'd probably say, got the worst brunt of the development. Out of the little development they had to split amongst each other, she kind of got the short end of the stick. But again, it does a fine job just trying to be there as a body and try to help keep conversations going.
And she's kind of funny. She was, she's the person that's getting, drug along on this scheme or whatever. It's just kind of... what was it? Macy has to keep her in line a few times. Yeah, it is like they go to a house in the beginning and they're trick or treating and ask it if they could have this pumpkin. Drunk teacher answers the door and she's dressed as like a slutty cat and she's like, "You kids want some alcohol?" Sarah's the one that's like, "Yeah," and Macy's like, "No," she's like, "We just want a pumpkin."
Yeah, which again, I think it's definitely good, because if it wasn't for jokes like that, then development would be non-existent. And I do like with Schrader how they do kind of show him. Again, you could tell he's like a bit like too cool for school. He looks like he'd be like one of the popular kids. But whenever they do pick up Rhonda, even though they did pick on her, he is at the very least nice. Wow, whether he was overly selling it or trying to genuinely be nice, that's kind of up in the air a bit there. But I feel like overall, the group of kids, I really liked seeing them. Again, it just, that whole scene just kind of just screamed Halloween. I mean, the whole film screams Halloween, period.
Of course, yeah.
There, yeah. But like just the whole like taking me back to being a kid.
Right.
Again. Because obviously I could still enjoy Halloween decorations as an adult, but, like, just, like, having that mysticism as a little kid there, I think it was super well done, and the fact that they talk about an urban legend that happened, it reminds you of your childhood during this time, so I think that's one thing I can really appreciate Michael conceiving with this story, so,
I think they do a good job of showing all kinds of different angles or perspectives on Halloween, how people might celebrate or not celebrate Halloween. I mean, it kind of starts off with a couple, and one of the guys loves Halloween, and the other girl is just done with it, and she's like, "My parents are coming in the morning, we gotta take down these decorations."
Oh, yeah.
And then, as it goes on, you see the kids that are trick-or-treating, but then you also see, the perspective of the principal who has a kid, and it's just like, these kids don't do Halloween right anymore. And you see the perspective of the old man neighbor who's like, "Get off my lawn, I hate Halloween," And you see the perspective of the girls that are like, Halloween's a chance for us to get out and party, so you kind of see how Halloween affects different age groups. I think it's kind of the entire scope of Halloween.
That's a really good observation. Holy hell, I'm glad we watched this film finally.
I enjoyed it. But what you also notice is that in each of the stories, one of the themes is that ties them all together is that somebody is disrespecting the traditions of Halloween or whatever. Somebody is not doing Halloween how you're supposed to do it, quote unquote. So whether it's the woman in the beginning and the guys like, don't blow out the jack-o'-lantern yet, that's a tradition or whatever. She's like, no, let's clean up the decorations now.
Yeah.
Or it's, I'm trying to think of.
Let's see.
Like
check your candy.
Yeah. Check your candy. Yeah. That's one of them. Even whenever they all go out to the rock quarry for the urban legend or whatever, it's kind of revealed more or less that they didn't believe that legend after all, and that comes back to bite them. So there's moments like that in each of the stories where they don't believe or buy or want to celebrate Halloween or whatever the case is, and then by the end of it, something happens as a result of their disrespect for the holiday.
No, absolutely correct there. And talking about the couple at the beginning, I didn't really mention them the first time because, again, it's so short. Because, again, it serves more as an intro, but that's one amazing intro. Like, that just kind of tells you exactly kind of what to be prepared for.
It gives you some of the sort of the humor of the movie too, right in the beginning, as well as some of the horror elements. Yeah,
and I mean, obviously, we can happen. And spoilers, we'll probably dissect each of the parts basically from beginning to end, probably. But one thing I do appreciate about that scene is how it incorporates later in the film. Right. I just thought it just made for good narrative there.
It also kind of, it does a really good job because this movie skips around in time a lot, and that can get confusing, but they actually kind of serve as an interesting anchor point, like an interesting map marker, because you will see they have very distinct costumes on, and you will occasionally see them in other scenes, and you're like, okay, so that's where we are in the timeline.
Yeah, and I think that's just absolutely well done. I'm going to go ahead and just fly through the rest of the characters. There's not too much. Like I said, there's a lot of characters in this film, but sometimes they just amount to, they're just there to push the plot forward. Right. There. But with the group of friends meeting up together, Lori is the one that is, super self-conscious because, again, she's never really had a date before, and, and she talks about how she's a virgin amongst her colleagues there, and they're like, well, you just need to find somebody,
just grab someone, doesn't matter who.
Yeah, and so I feel like, I mean, obviously, as it probably needs to be, I liked her the best, because, again, I do love her timidness and shyness there throughout. Talking about other TV shows, apparently, I got a lot of Pam vibes from The Office from her.
Okay, I guess a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit there. But I really like her character because, again, pretty much whenever I watched it the first time, especially, I was really kind of rooting for her to kind of find that date, because, again, I'm just like, oh yeah, going to a party, and you could tell she's really nervous and everything, and does it really well, like the actress who played her. See, now I need to pull out the another IMDb, but
say it's Jen Fisher.
Oh my god.
They do have the same hair.
Yeah, they do.
They sort of curly.
I would
dark red. Yeah.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. All right. Anna Paquin.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I feel like she did just a really good job and was a good central character to follow. Not that the other characters were terrible by any means, but again, they kind of serve more as to help be a catalyst for her. Come on, hurry up, the night's almost over.
Yeah, it was mostly her sister that was trying to pull her along through this, and she's like, no, I want my first time to be special.
And Danielle's the sister. That's where the name came from.
And that's sort of the leader of that group of people that are going to the party, and then Lori's kind of the one that's I guess I'm doing this,
And then there's Mariah and Janet.
They're just kind of
they're filler,
right?
But again, they do a good job. They're
the sidekick friends. Yeah.
Yes, the sidekick friends just kind of help to prove a point that look, we all have dates, you need to get one there. And so I think that's done really well. And so yeah, again, it's so weird to talk about these characters without trying to spoil anything.
Right, because the
there.
story, because
Yeah.
I mean, these are little vignettes of stories, so it's hard to like. Well, this is what happens because that's most of the story if we tell you.
So we'll come back to this group of gals later. Really, the only one I guess we need to talk about is Krieg at the very end, and
Yeah,
I
we gotta
feel
talk about
like
him.
he's a really it's played by Brian Cox. He does an amazing job, but again, he does get a lot of development time because it's just him, because he's reclusive. He doesn't really have anybody else but his dog, and without saying anything, you know exactly who this character is, especially in the house he lives in, and the fact that there's no electricity, everything's overgrown, run down. The only source of light he has is the fireplace. Actually, I lied about the electricity. I think he keeps all the lights off except the TV.
Yeah.
Let's not be ridiculous. He doesn't want to be an animal.
But he's got some like short fuses and stuff. There's a part where he tries to turn on a light and it like pops,
Yeah, and so I think with him, you know exactly what kind of character he is, and so going through the story, you don't really need to know too much about him. He's just a big curmudgeon on Halloween, and a whole incident happens to him, and again, he's trying to deal with it. And you even know he's curmudgeon early on, because basically, again, you hear him interwoven into the principal story. So, yeah, definitely good stuff, and lots of stuff to dive into here. Before getting into the spoilers, I imagine there's probably not too much without spoiling there. Any other points? I mean, one thing I will say is that I love the set pieces of this film.
Yeah.
The set pieces, it's like they try to cram as much Halloween as you can, and kind of like mentioning what you mentioned, how there's like different stuff that different age groups do on Halloween. You get to see it. You get to see the neighborhoods that are all decorated there, seeing the kids run around, all the jack-o'-lanterns, absolutely love it there. You get to see that primarily, especially with the principal story, and then you get to see the party vibe aspect there whenever they're having the town Halloween party with
the big parade and everything in the downtown of this Ohio town. Okay, so it's not New England, but it's north,
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think, it's in that Ohio area there for sure. So definitely sells that. And then you get to see just a lot more eerie environments there as the kiddos are going to the rock quarry. That again kind of remind you of Halloween, the desolate stuff that ends up being eerie, and especially on Halloween night, the rustling leaves and everything. Oh, I just can't get enough of that. I'm already
and then it's gonna be scary because it's in Ohio and nothing good happens there. So.
Oh my gosh. And then even with Mr. Krieg, I like how even though he's in his house the entire time, they did sneak little bits of Halloween on the TV, because again, he's trying to flip through, trying to watch something aside from the cooking channel, and it's all Halloween specials or talk about Halloween, and then he's find cooking channel sticks on there. So that's something I can really appreciate. And it's one of those things that I think this film is more Halloween than Halloween is. I truly believe that, because while Halloween, the first one, does have remnants of the holiday, this just says hold my beer.
Right, because I think the entire point, because the Halloween movies are this takes place on Halloween and Mike Myers comes back on Halloween, and so Halloween's happening, but it's not necessarily the point of the movie. But the point of this movie is about the spirit of Halloween, about what people do on Halloween. Every plot element revolves on something Halloween related, not just oh no, we're dying. It's okay, there's a thing that we're doing because it's Halloween and we're in the Halloween spirit,
And another point of the presentation that I really love about Trick or Treat is at the beginning, whenever they're rolling the credits, you see a lot of comic panel style stuff, because again, a lot of horror comics back in the day would be anthology stories. They tell one spooky story.
That's one thing I was going to ask. Was this adapted from a comic series?
No, not that I believe so anyways. This just came from Michael's mind. It actually was based on a short he had made called Season's Greetings, which I guess they had changed the name of because it sounds Christmassy there. But yeah, I think he just took a lot of inspiration from that and tried to sell it, which I really love a ton. But yeah, you would think so, especially with the comic covers they stylized on, and
a lot
seeing
of
the
the
panels.
graphics, yeah, a lot of even just like the little things that said like earlier or whatever would be comic book styled.
Yeah, and I do really like it. It can be a little jarring because it only happens like very rarely.
Right.
But at the same point, I really like it a ton, and the music of the film I really like a ton. There's not really like, that, Halloween theme level of music there, or like music that I'm like, oh yeah, that means this, but it's like really good music I really like a ton throughout the film. So that's another aspect. Trying to think, is there anything you would say that you weren't quite as big of a fan of in this film?
Yeah, honestly, I think the film's really good overall. I do think, and none of my criticisms of this film are like, this was awful, but it was like, well, there's probably a way you could do this better.
Yeah.
And one of those things for me is where they choose to unveil certain plot elements. I do feel like the first half of the movie, by and large, doesn't matter to like the main overarching plot. They don't really even get into the lore of like, here's the thing that happened 30 years ago or anything until like you're over halfway through the movie. And also it's not so much that like the stuff at the beginning was bad, but like you'll notice the two stories at the beginning are the ones that we rated last. It's like, so the most interesting content is all backloaded in the movie. And so I can see somebody who's just like, if people actually had cable anymore, if they're flipping through the channels and watch this and watched 15 minutes of this movie, they'd be like, well, let's just try to find something else. You know what I mean? Because it's not that it's bad. It's just like the most engaging and the most interesting aspects of it are all at the end, and they don't necessarily need to be. It could have been chopped up a little bit differently. That is just so that's probably my main criticism of this movie. But it's not to say that I don't like the way it's structured or spaced, because I think it is structured really well. The way they weave little elements in here and there. But yeah, I'd say it's that, and it's also the kind of. The movie you think it's going to be in the beginning is not the movie it is at all, which isn't even necessarily a criticism. It's just like an interesting thing I don't know how I feel about. Because that opening scene with the couple, and it's like, it seems very slashery. And the rest of the movie, honestly, is not slashery at all, with the exception of one of the stories, I guess. But it's not super slasher oriented, and I kind of thought that's what the whole movie was going to be, just based on that opening scene. But... yeah, those are sort of kind of my two big things, but
okay.
Yeah, overall, every other little thing I have is just kind of nitpicky, like like the comic book graphics. I think the intro and the outro are really interesting, but yeah, there's only like 2 or 3 other times where it pops up, and it's a little bit like, does this really fit?
Yeah, it definitely feels kind of jarring.
It feels like somebody watched Scott Pilgrim and was like, I'm gonna do this, but not for the whole movie. You know what I mean? I don't want to make a whole movie like that just to put it in some parts because it's cool. And it's like, well, if you're gonna do that, you kind of have to do that for the whole movie.
Yeah. It's a weird decision, because I'm like, if you kept it in, I feel like I'm glad they didn't overdo it and just be like, do covers for each of them, because one of my biggest issues I have with Donnie Darko, which is like basically my favorite film, is on the director's cut. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but basically, the movie Donnie Darko just plays straight, but in the director's cut, there's like these breaks where it shows like the pages flipping in a book, and basically gives like these chapter names of the book that Donnie reads about like time travel theory. And basically the chapter titles, I feel like, take away the mystique of the film there and kind of scream it out on what it means. And it just feels jarring there as opposed to that. So I'm glad that Michael didn't do that. Like, if he was going to do it, that he just kept it pretty much towards the beginning end and very tiny sprinkles of it, like not a lot of it. So I think that was definitely good.
What about you? Is there anything in this movie that you would point at and be like, could have been better? It's one of those things that this is my second time watching it, and knowing what happens, it's like, okay, let me ask this. Were the twists that happened at the end of the stories, were you expecting them the first time? I By the time we started getting through to like the third or fourth story, I was expecting some sort of twist at the end because like just each one had ended with an M. Night Shyamalan twist. You know what I mean? But as far as predicting exactly what the twist was, no, not really. Yeah, I think they did a pretty good job of like maybe. Let me think. No, I thought they were all pretty. I mean, they weren't mind blowing, but they were like good enough twists that I wasn't like, yeah, no, this is coming.
Yeah, because watching it the second time, whenever like I said, even though it had been 6 years, I remembered the twist there because I did not expect any of the twist in the film. So watching it the second time, there's some hints that they sprinkle in, which I definitely feel like. Whenever it comes to twist, I like there being hints and not it being just like, there's no way you could have predicted this would happen. But the hints that you see in the film are pretty heavy-handed a little bit the second time watching through. Which, again, it wasn't like horribly distracting where I'm like, oh, this is terrible. But it was definitely like, okay, they were really making sure that you knew. And it went over my head the first time because they make it sound so casual.
Right.
So, while I definitely don't think it's like a fault of the film there, it's just weird how second time watching through, whenever I know what happens, the hints are way bigger than I expected there. So I'm not sure how to feel about that. I will say some of the effects range from really awesome looking to pretty cheesy, and it's both, and it's not even just like the CGI use, but it's also in practical effect use. It kind of got cheesy, and this will be talked about in one of the short stories, like the effects that were used there. Very mixed feelings about. So watching it out, I'm like, The other thing that kind of perplexes me is like, first time going through, I didn't know what the rules were. Second time watching through, I've only picked up on like a couple of stuff. So, and one character we really forgot to talk about, which I'm very surprised because we mentioned him briefly, is Sam himself.
Right. Yeah.
There, but like kind of what rules does he operate under?
Right.
There, it's just very kind of loose, which, don't get me wrong, I love Sam as a character. I love his design. I love the idea that the spirit of Halloween is in this like little kid. I think it's definitely interesting, but that just was another thing. And then kind of like what the rules are, because it seems like there's a set of rules to follow, and even the principal mentions that on Halloween, whenever the living and the dead basically merge together almost, there's a set of rules you need to follow, which is why I think that was like good to have the principal story be first, because it kind of helps give ground on like, hey, in this universe here, but they don't ever make the lines super clear. It's not like I was about to say it's not Gremlins rules, but even then they say don't feed them after midnight. Well, isn't every day after midnight? But yeah, that's beside the point. So those are some of my critiques there. Again, even though the characters in the story aren't strong, that's not really the point. You're not watching it for like these really grounded characters. It's just enjoying these short little stories. Right.
And yeah, there's something to be said about that, to make not just one compelling story, but put four and then make them all work together is really difficult to do. So the fact that this one did it so well, and from what you told me is a straight to DVD movie, it doesn't feel like a straight to DVD movie.
Yeah,
it doesn't. Yeah, it's pretty high quality for a. For something that's trying to weave those things together, which can easily be like if one of the stories is just a dud, and they're like, well, I got to keep this in here because this thing influences the other story, and then you're sitting there watching 30 minutes of big poo poo, like that would suck. But none of so these sorts of structures can easily go awry, and it doesn't here. It all works really well.
Yeah, it's a really hard balance, and again, it's just crazy to think Warner Brothers didn't have enough faith in this movie to release it theatrically until just this year. This year is the first time it's ever debuted theatrically, so I think that's like really exciting. So those are like small nitpicks I have. And again, it's very small for me because, as you probably were anticipating, I was probably going to like this film. You probably would have been very surprised if I'm like, never mind. I don't know why I got excited for this film. This film sucks.
Sucks.
I will ask this. Obviously, we'll talk about him more. But what are your thoughts on Sam, both character design wise, use in the film?
I like the idea of Sam a lot, and I do actually kind of like the way they portray it, where they leave you as a mystery as to who he is, why he keeps kind of showing up, but like why different characters interact with him differently. You know what I mean? And then it all kind of makes sense at the end when you figure out who he is. And I love that they just let the audience figure it out without somebody being like, "That's Sam, the spirit of Halloween." You know?
Oh, that would have been so bad.
Just like. They do a really good job of something else that a lot of, I think, especially horror movies, but just any movie does a bad job of, especially watch like superhero movies these days or something. It's like instead of just like letting the audience figure it out, they have to spell it out for you in like some cheesy exposition. They're like, "Oh, this is happening because of this and this," and the characters are just having like unnatural dialogue with each other so that the audience knows Sam, named after Samhain, the spirit of Halloween, will only attack you if, you know, like it's like I'm glad that they don't do that kind of shit. So I feel like the way he was revealed and all that was really good. But I also think it's interesting that like he's kind of the face of this movie, but he's also not in it very much, and he's also not developed almost at all until the end. But like I don't mind that, you know what I mean?
No, I think like the fact that Sam is not the like character that gets the most screen time, I think that makes his presence more effective. Because I mean,
because then you're like, oh, there's that thing again. What's he all about? You know?
Yeah, because they don't really ever say anything. You don't even really see him until later. Like you see from his perspective, but you don't know that it's him. It isn't until I think the principal's story, whenever they're going up and grabbing candy from the bowl. Standing, and it's so funny too. I think that's why I love Sam so much, because again, he is kind of like a mysterious character. I feel like whenever it comes to mysterious characters, he's a better mysterious character than Michael Myers, I feel like. Because again, like he's not just like standing there stalking. He's going up trick-or-treating, so you think he's just like a little kid there, because again, he's really short with like orange like pajamas with like this burlap sack, and you know, he's going up just grabbing candy, you know, not saying anything and walking away. And I love that. They could have easily just had to be kind of like more omnipotent, but the fact that he is kind of like a mix of being like ominous and just a kid is really really well done. I will say the fact that spoilers, you do figure out what's underneath the mask. The first time I saw it, it is a bit underwhelming.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not terrible, but it is a bit underwhelming. It's like
the design with the mask on leaves so much mystery as like what's underneath it, and then whenever you see what's underneath it, it's like, well, it's like they're trying too hard to be scary.
Yeah, it's like weird, because again, it's like whenever, you know, well, and obviously I know you haven't seen it, but whenever Jason takes his hockey mask off there, it's kind of like the same thing, but again, just that hockey mask on him, he's just so iconic in that.
Right.
Or like for people that aren't horror fans that are for some reason listening to this, like whenever the Beast turns into the Prince in Beauty and the Beast, you're like, he had such a better design as the Beast.
Right, turn him back to the Beast.
Yes, so, but again, it wasn't ever bad enough to where I'm like, oh, I hate the design, but it's definitely like, I like the burlap sack look better. Yeah. It's just a very striking image there, and I love how he's dragging his little trick-or-treat bag behind him. But yeah, I do love that he's there in, I believe, each of the stories. Although one of the appearances is a little questionable there. It's the one.
Which one?
He makes an appearance that I wouldn't say this is spoilers, but during the girls' party they were going to.
Oh yeah, that one was
it was a little weird. I think it was one of those things like, well, we've been having him appear in each of the stories. We have to figure out somewhere to do it. But again, it wasn't bad enough to where I was like, you know, this is awful.
I do think the one interesting thing to come out of that is just seeing how, like, because at that point in the story, like, the girls don't react to him at all. He's like at the party naturally, and that kind of lets the audience be like, huh, you know?
Yeah, like who is?
Because normally you'd either
Yeah.
be like, why is there a child here? Or,
Yeah.
scared because you're getting murdered by a child or whatever. But at that point, you're like, okay. Like, you're starting to see kind of who he is, or what more so, you're kind of seeing what he means to all these Halloween revelers.
Yeah, I probably say, and I don't know if it's spoilers, we'll talk about it more, but probably aside from the last story, my favorite pop-up of him is during the kid story, just the way that he appears. And I don't know, we're getting so close to spoilers, I just want to tear the sucker open there. So why don't you go ahead and give your rating for this film before we dived into the spoiledness of the film?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this was a really good story. I think they did a really good job weaving in everything. I think we've talked about all the things that I would sort of summarize here anyway. I think you guys get the point. By this point in the podcast, so really my only nitpicks are the ones that I kind of went over where, and they're not even that big. It's just, how exactly those stories were structured and sort of end loading the whole thing with the more interesting parts and kind of leaving the audience wondering, if there were a less patient audience, they might be tuned out by the point that it gets really interesting, which would be a shame because there's so much good stuff in this movie to devour. So I'm gonna give it an 8. It's an 8 for me.
That's pretty good.
It's really good. It's not a 9 or a 10 just because all the things that are good there's a lot of those things could use some more polish. You know what I mean? And a lot of that just comes with not having the budget, or obviously Warner Brothers didn't believe in them enough apparently to make it a full release. So maybe some of those setbacks were studio based or production based, but it's it's a really solid movie. It's not a masterpiece, but it's really good. So I give it an 8.
Well, that's pretty good. I didn't know what you would were going to rate it, because this time round, as opposed to last time, actually the last 2 times I would probably say, like, we're rip roaring riot sort of thing there. It was like pretty quiet throughout. I was invested in the film, and so I wasn't even just paying attention to what you were doing.
Right.
Which again, it's probably going to give more hints as to what I'm going to rate it. But I would agree with you. This is pretty much one of my favorite horror movies. It has climbed up to the top, and even after visiting it again 6 years later, this is what kind of solidifies it, because I would always think like, man, that was a really good film. That was really good. And then after just watching it now again, it just kind of solidifies it, even if there are some things that maybe I've noticed more this time round, or still I'm like, I don't know how to feel about that. It's a really strong film, and one that if you love horror, it needs to be a staple every Halloween for you. I mean, this is the most Halloweenish film I've ever seen, and probably ever will see. I think a lot of other films would strive really hard to capture the Halloween essence like this film has, and so that's why for me, Trick or Treat gets an absolute 9 out of 10 for me. Like, if I'm being like extra generous, like maybe 9.25, 9.5 there. Not quite a 10 there, just because there are a few nitpicks there, but who knows, like maybe over time it might hit a 10 for me, because like I said, there's a lot to really love about this film. And again, it's just like, if you ever really want that Halloween mood, this will just capture it perfectly, and it's just an absolute joy. And I'm so happy that I finally got to talk about it on this podcast. But wait, there's more, and this one's a real screamer. We're gonna jump right into spoilers. So I mean, what do you think? Just take us all the way through, just all the bullet points there from the
they did
start
such a
to
good
the
job
beginning.
of laying it all out that we could follow the same path that they have given us.
But so like the couple at the beginning, I know we didn't talk about it too much, but I think there's definitely quite a few bits to at least pick up on appreciating it. So Aaron,
Sure.
I was about to spoil it. I was about to steal the spoiler right underneath your feet there, so I will let you spoil it first.
Yeah, sure. So, like, is this couple, the woman, right from the get-go, you can tell is not a Halloween person. She's like, wow, this was a great idea. And the guy's like, oh, come on, it was a good time. And she's like, I'm I'm gonna blow out this pumpkin. And he's like, oh, don't do that. You wait till morning. She's like, no, my mom's coming. And, you're not going to do it in the morning. You're going to want to play video games and yada, yada. So she blows out the pumpkin and he's like, all right, well, don't say I didn't warn you. There are rules to Halloween. So that sort of sets up the whole premise for the movie. He's like, there are rules. There's been traditions. And she's like, it's Halloween, not Hanukkah. It's not a big deal. Because she doesn't follow the rules of Halloween, and she's taken down all the decorations and stuff, she kind of sees, well, first she sees this menacing, tall, bloody masked creature watching her. And she's like, what's going on here? And, ooh, and then he eventually gets into a car and drives off, and it's just some dude waiting for his friends. And she's like,
that was such a good fake out there. Like, I didn't feel like it was cheap at all because the dude, might just be looking at the decorations there, not thinking anything, and then just gets in a car. That was really good. I thought that was well done.
Yeah. So then the dude goes upstairs. He's like, you want to fuck? She's like, fine, go. Put on the tape. It's a pretty funny movie. They have a tape labeled Nature documentary, and it's just porn that I'm just watching on the TV. And so she's like cleaning up in the yard, and that whole scare happens, and she's like, "Whew, not gonna get murdered." And then who you presume to be Sam, you don't really see him, but some short little creature tangled in the sheets with her, tackles her over and stabs her.
Yeah, that blood splatter underneath the sheet was so good, and those trick-or-treaters just seeing it, and they're like, nope.
They just don't want anything to do with that house. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And so I really like just that moment because it shows you something, but you don't realize you're getting shown something. It shows the power of the jack-o'-lanterns have. She blows out all the jack-o'-lanterns, and then she's not safe anymore, which you realize in one of the later stories is like an important thing, a rule to keep yourself from getting killed. And then, and it just sets up the theme of like those that are disrespecting Halloween, and also, it's mostly those that are getting disrespecting Halloween are the ones that are going to get punished, usually with getting fucking killed by someone or something.
I think, and again, that's why I really love that they start the film with that, because again, it just kind of establishes again the kind of film you're getting ready for, and I feel like it just serves as a great intro. And again, it's a very short story, but again, it's super effective. Just basically, again, I wouldn't say the characters are deep, but also at the same time, they're not like super duper comedic, because they could have easily been like she could have been just straight up awful there, but that she still loves him, because again,
she went out and did this for him, even though she doesn't like Halloween.
Yeah, and then she's even like okay, yeah, why don't we put on the tape later there, and again, she has good reason for cleaning it up. She's not like, oh, I hate Halloween, it's so stupid, I hate it. It makes it more realistic, like, no, my mom's going to be here, she's going to be mad about it, and I'm just tired of it. And so I think it's just done so well in a way. And again, even the guy kind of makes a joke being like, oh, you need to leave the jack-o'-lantern on. And it's like, why? He's like, it's tradition or something. Like, he's not even like just 100% positive. He's just kind of saying like, oh, it's like how people say, but it's Christmas.
Well, it did feel like that. Like, imagine taking down the Christmas decorations on Christmas Eve.
Oh, my wife would kill me. Yeah. It's not even Sam, it's just my wife coming to kill me.
And like just imagine being that much of a Grinch, but anyway.
But so I think like it's really well done, because they could have easily just made it just stereotypes as opposed to like more grounded characters, and you see both their points of view. She's definitely being kind of a curmudgeon about it, but at the same point, you see her point of view that she's like, okay, I'm done with Halloween, it's over. And she's already not even a big fan of it. But one other detail that I love a ton is how they set up stuff that comes into play even in that short scene. Because again, in their yard, they have like ghosts hanging up like with these like little wooden fixtures there, and then body parts hanging from the tree, which again, you don't think anything about, because you're just like, oh yeah, that's like the decorations there. But then whenever it cuts to like the husband passing out, because again, just fell asleep, just trying to wait for her.
Mhm.
And then he goes outside and, you know, sees body parts hanging from the tree, but doesn't think anything of it because he's like, oh, yeah, that's my decoration there.
Right.
And then right before even the reveal, you know something bad is happening because you see a ring
Right.
on the hand. You're like, that looks a little too real.
Mhm.
And then whenever the big reveal is pulled and you see basically the corpse of the wife on the wooden fixture there wrapped in Halloween lights with a big sucker in her mouth there.
Mhm.
Like, I feel like that is such a well done scene just to kind of start the film.
Right.
Just being like, all right, here it is. And so then jumping after the intro, you know, credits they have going on, the title cards, everything. I love that on the camera, you don't realize it at the time, but you're following right behind Sam because he's dragging his bag. You don't really know who it is, but the camera pans up and it shows all of the characters that are going to be part of the story. And again, that constant interweaving, like they could have easily just ignored it just to make it less complicated of a story, but the fact that they don't and they just do that, I just love that a ton. I think that's super.
And that's really,
well
I feel
done.
like the key to success for these sorts of anthology stories is to like give not just for rewatchability value, but just so like, because like even in that next scene, you then see the couple that was just murdered, and it kind of tells you like, oh, this is happening before that, because you see the woman, she was wearing a very distinctive like giant robot costume, and you're like, oh, okay, you know. So it's like you from the beginning, you're like, not only do I know these are two separate stories and this is something that happened before this, but you also kind of get slammed in your face right there. You're going to see things from other people's stories, and so look out for them, you know. And so that gets the viewer, even on a first-time watch, being like, looking out for, like, oh, this guy's in this scene too, or, oh, you know, I noticed this detail from the last scene, or, oh, I've seen this house before, you know.
Yeah, and so it's just so well done. And we'll talk about the principal story because that was one we had to jump over a lot of stuff where we couldn't even talk about the whole idea. We just said
he's
something
a murderer.
happened. Yes, yeah, definitely a murderer for sure. Because one of the things I love is again the introduction to the fat kid, who I found out his name's Charlie. Just the way that he's just being an absolute little punk there, you know, just eating candy and just casually knocking pumpkins over. He's not even like. Again, you see so many in movies, like people just revel in joy. They're like, like just comedic. No, he's just like, do.
He's just an asshole.
Yeah.
He's just a little shit.
And so he does it.
He does remind me of, is it Augustus Gloop from...
Yes.
Is that why he's named Charlie? Because of, like, Charlie in the Chocolate Factory?
That's probably right. You're probably onto something there.
I was going to make an Oompa Loompa joke about him, too. Like, because he starts... Because he gets fed... Sorry to spoil his spoiler, but he gets... He eats all the candy off the porch, and it was like he didn't check his candy, and it was full of like poison, and so he starts like barfing up blood, but it just looks like chocolate.
Yeah, it was a lot of it.
It looks like it's a chocolate river, and it's you know it's all down his mouth and stuff, and it just reminded me of Augustus Gloop drowning in the chocolate river.
Yeah, and it's so funny too. Because it again leads to a very comedic moment. Like after the principal has his like little monologue talking about his relationship with his dad and kind of like there are rules you gotta respect,
Right.
you know, establishing that as he's casually carving a pumpkin on the porch, and then he's dragging the like basically dead kid because he slumps over and he's just like regurgitating like blood and chocolate all over him. He's like ah, and. So, and again, it's like that. It's like a joke you see in a lot of films whenever he has to answer the door, and it's like the main kids who are part of the second story, and you know there's blood all over them, and they just think it's a costume.
Right.
There, you know, I just think it's like when I was like, yeah, that's clever. And I love whenever he's trying to bury the bodies.
Yeah, he like has a plot already dug in the back because he knew some kid was gonna come eat all this candy, I guess, and there's already a body in there, and he's like throwing the fat kid's body on top, and then the neighbor's dog comes over, and his kid's yelling from the window, and he's like trying to hide this body from all of them, you know.
Yeah, doing that. But what's interesting is the second time round, because I was thinking the same thing, because the reveal that they have that basically the kid is aware of it.
Yeah.
he actually doesn't try to hide it too much from the kid. That's
Yeah,
so,
I kind of noticed that because he's just like,
Yeah.
whatever, like, go back. He's like, stop being loud is his big
but
thing with the kid.
yeah, please do not think that I am just like, oh, I caught that the first time. I didn't. I thought he was trying to hide it from his kid as well.
I thought he was just bad at, like, I wasn't sure if he
Yeah.
was trying to hide it. I thought he was just bad at hiding it because at a certain point, you know, he's like kicking the body while the neighbor's
Yeah.
talking to him and stuff and is making noises. So I was like,
Mhm.
maybe his kid's just too dumb to do anything about it. But...
Yeah, it does lead to just a funny conversation. Which again, you've seen scenarios like this where someone's trying to hide something they're doing there,
Mhm.
and you know, it's like, oh yeah, septic tank
Mhm.
broken. But I do love that who you find out later to be Krieg is like saying, "Smells like a dead whore out here."
Yeah.
But it's so overly comedic and goofy that, you know, you can't help but laugh at like how awful it is that basically he has these kids in the
Mhm.
ground, and then he's like hitting them with a shovel,
Right.
trying to do all that. And then whenever he comes inside, you know, and his son is ready to you know, carve the pumpkin.
Mhm.
And so they go downstairs. This is one of my biggest issues I have because I feel like it's tricking the audience
Right.
in not a clever way.
Mhm.
I understand why, because whenever I watched it the first time, I'm like, okay, he's going to kill his own kid. Like, he's just completely
Right.
unhinged. Because, like, he hides the knife awkwardly behind his back. Then they go down to the basement there.
And he
Yeah.
just got done being like, yeah, kid asking me questions about this and why is my mother dead and like all these.
That was such a good line. There's a lot of good lines, like say, keep watching Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown's an asshole. So good. But yeah, so you think like, again, he's going to kill his son going down, because even in the basement, he just very uncomfortably grabs the top of his head
Mhm.
there to where it looks like he's just trying to hold him in place there. And then, you know, he stabs down and pulls up, and it's not even like a fake out of the pumpkin, because this caught me off guard.
Yeah.
This was definitely something I did not anticipate the first time. But then turns out the pumpkin they're carving is Charlie's head.
Yeah.
And so, again, whenever you listen to the context of the kid saying, I need help with the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he's just saying like, oh, let's start with the eyes. Like, the kid is obviously in on
Right.
this there. So it's like, I like this story, but I do feel like there is a lot of moments that I'm like, that was kind of cheap a bit. And so
I agree with you.
like, you know, it's like one of those tricks the first time round, you know, it's good,
Mhm.
but then this subsequent watch made it a little more like, okay, we get it. It's not, you're not going to stab him, you know, I'm very mixed on it. I feel like on the one hand, it's a good first time trick.
Mhm.
On the other hand, it just is less impressive the second time round.
Right.
But overall, I do think story-wise, it definitely does make it pretty demented that they cut a kid's head off and they're carving it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that he's basically raising a little serial killer.
He does kind of throw a rock into the mix. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but like we don't really know who Sam is at this point. So I was like, there was a little thought in my head, is like, is this little kid Sam? But then I was like, no, because he's been in his room the whole time, and you see the neighbor get like tackled by something when he was screaming for help. So I was like, probably not. But at the same time, like, short, twisted little knifer. You know, is that the principal's kid running around knifing?
You know, that's actually a really good point. I never thought about the kid being Sam whatsoever. That never crossed my mind. But, you know, I see exactly where you're coming from and why you would think that.
And especially a movie that has so much that's tied in together. I was like, is this going to be one of the big reveals?
Yeah. But overall, I thought, like, you know, again, the principal story, it's short, wacky, but, you know, I'm perfectly fine with it being included in Trick or Treat. I don't feel like it's one of those things like, I wish they would have cut this part out.
Right.
No,
if they had to cut one story, that'd probably be the one that you cut, and it would make the most sense to cut, and like the rest of the story would still flow. But
yeah, for sure. But even then, I still enjoyed it a ton. Yeah. So it's definitely a good one, and I'm glad that they did it at the beginning. But it does. On the other hand, like you mentioned, like if people are trying to watch it, they could easily tune out during that part, because really it isn't until the second story with the kids where it picks up. And again, the weird thing about like the girls' night out basically is that I would say it's the most chopped up film, because they have like little moments of like showing like, you know, the girls are getting their costumes ready for tonight,
Right.
and then
they're getting boys at the parade or whatever.
So I'm for the sake of just keeping everything kind of compartmentalized, I'm just going to probably jump to the kiddos story.
Yeah, that's fair. I do want to say real quick on the
go ahead.
principal, I do like how Sam appears there, and he's just kind of like goes up and gets the candy. And
I
leaves or
love
whatever.
that.
And like at the time, I didn't quite understand what Sam's motives were, but like thinking back on it now, it makes so much sense, because like the principal's observing the rules of Halloween or whatever, and so like Sam's not going to do anything. He just wants some candy and is going to leave. You know?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing too, because you would think that, you know, it's like, oh, bad people have bad things happen to them, and you know, while certainly that is the point, as we find out later. For Sam, it's just respecting Halloween, which, you know, Sam kind of, he is all-knowing kind of in a sense there. And so to him, he's like, no, you're celebrating Halloween. You're good, you know, and he's handing out. And I just love how that's one of my favorite moments, seeing Sam like just look up, grab the candy, and just kind of waddle away.
Right.
I feel like that's just so well done. And yeah, definitely glad you brought up that moment there. That again, in Sam's eyes, the principal is following all the traditions and respecting Halloween. So he's just like, no, you're good in my book. So that is a really good observation.
Does get his just desserts in the end, and you can like, it's hard to tell. I guess once we go through all of them, we can see if Sam's delivering these punishments or not. But there are several people that have done bad things, but then observe the rules of Halloween. But then still get punished by other Halloween-ish forces.
And so that's one of my things, especially with the final story on how that plays out. Which again, it's like very mixed bag about how I feel. Because again, I'm definitely kind of like, you know, a lot of times I feel like, you know, people that have something happen that's undeserved, I'm pretty mixed on. But we'll talk about that later.
Right. But yeah, and then the girls, just like before we get to the
definitely
before we get to the kids, I get like whenever you're just seeing little bits of the girls and they're like, oh, I'm a virgin or whatever. It's like by the end of the movie you get they're like playing on what that means, you know, and they're playing on the sort of moralistic aspects of other Halloween movies of like, the virgin girl is the good one and doesn't get killed, and the other one. So I thought that's kind of where that was going, and then it turned out to be a whole different thing at the end.
Yeah, that one by far biggest twist I was not prepared for. Definitely none in the slightest. So I agree with you.
But the trick or treating kiddos.
Yeah, and so I do like that, you know, they're gathering up these jack-o'-lanterns, and you don't know why, because they're not destroying them or anything. But then, like, the thing that I'm very curious about is the amount of effort they went into doing that, as to why they would want to invite Rhonda, because even though it's a weird kid, because I mean, again,
it's a weird kid that really likes Halloween, so they were like, oh, let's prank her with the Halloween legends or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like, I totally get that, but they went through a lot of effort and planning just for this one thing. And so again, that's whenever you get the like the minor nitpicks there, that it doesn't really ruin the story, but it does definitely make you raise an eyebrow.
It's pretty unrealistic even for a prank. I mean, they don't seem to like despise this girl or anything, so it's like, why go through all of that?
Yeah. And I do love that outside her house she has like a ton of jack-o'-lanterns, and you know, Schrader, I think that's the kiddo's name, he asks her like, oh, hey, did you carve all these pumpkins? She's like, yeah, and I made this costume too. And I really want to talk about a parallel that pops up later, and I'm very curious on, with your expertise with literature and everything, on how you thought about it. But I feel like it's a good mix, and again, whenever they dive in and they go all the way to the rock quarry, which, by the way, I love that one shot of them crossing a pumpkin patch. They could have easily cut that part out, but just the silhouette of seeing the kids, you know, dragging the wagon with the pumpkins there, they're all in costume, it just screamed Halloween. For me.
Yeah, all those scenes where they're dragging through with a little wagon full of jack-o'-lanterns. It's just, it's a great visual.
No, it really is. And so whenever they finally get to the rock quarry, that's whenever Macy decides to tell the tale about a school bus crash that happened years and years ago.
30 years ago, precisely.
Ooh, very nice. Well done. Well done,
I
Aaron.
remember numbers.
Hooray for remembering numbers.
Oh.
And I didn't know how to feel. The first time I watched it, I was not prepared for how dark the story was whenever it came to the kiddos. Because basically, the whole urban legend is that there's a school bus driver who had these kids with him, and these kids I guess were like very troubled kids there. Now whether that means they were like special needs or something, they kept
kind of both were implied, like whether they were like traumatized kids or like special needs, and I think it was like a little bit combination of both. I don't know, but...
for sure. Like basically, weren't guilty by, like, they're not like serial killers or anything like that, but as the urban legend says, the parents just did not want the kids. They grew tired of trying to raise them and everything. So it's kept very vague, and I think for the sake of Michael, that was a smart decision to keep it as vague as possible, because I think definitely if they had pointed to one thing or another there, it would have taken the urban legend aspect out a little bit there. But yeah, definitely was not prepared for the fact that the parents apparently paid the bus driver a ton of money to get rid of these kids. And so the flashback, I feel like, is very well done, because even the mask, like, the kids are off-putting wearing those masks. Like, it's not even... The masks themselves aren't even that terrifying or grotesque, scary. They're just unnerving there, because they're like the simple, like, kind of cheap plastic mask there. And so you see, like, one's dressed up as a bunny, one's dressed up like Dracula, one's like a devil that's freakishly tall, as you see. And then whenever it cuts to reveal that basically he took a different turn as opposed to going to the school and taking him to a rock quarry, where you assume he's probably going to push him out, because it then shows that they were chained up, which again kind of makes me lead to reveal on, like, why would kids be willingly, like, chained up there, because they were silent the whole way through, except for one kid who recognized they were going the wrong way and are not at school.
Yeah, I think it's kind of implied when he does a final, like, check that everybody's chained up after he stops at the edge of the rock quarry. He, like, has a bucket of candy, and they already have some candy, and they're eating it. And he, like, checks their chains and then, like, gives them a piece of candy. So he probably, like, bribed them with candy to be like, put your chains on, you get candy. And
yeah,
I think that's, like, sort of implied. But
no, I think you're right. I think you're right with that implication there. Just definitely keeps them quiet. But then, of course, whenever the one kid in the Dracula outfit slips out of his cuffs, I'm surprised that he tries to drive the school bus. But again, if he's just mentally not there, then, that's kind of,
and
like...
he's sort of portrayed that way because he's, like, he's counting the address numbers as they're driving, and as soon as he doesn't recognize it, he's like, wrong way, and he kind of keeps saying wrong way, and that's all he's saying, and he's like rocking back and forth. And, he slips out, and so whenever he gets out, instead of just running, he goes up to he's like gotta go back home, and he just floors it. They fly off the cliff.
Fly off the cliff there. I will say one thing that and later you'll see why. One thing that I would have cut out, and but then again, I'm not sure. This is one of those things that I'm fine with it being in the film, but maybe if they had cut it out, I wonder how more effective it would be, is showing the bus driver making it out alive.
Yeah.
I mean, then again, I don't know if, like, him not being revealed would be considered cheap or not. Kind
That's
of
a
like...
good question. Yeah, because you come to find out in the next story, the bus driver is alive, right? So if they show it then, or you find out later, I don't know. But no, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm uncertain about, but I'm fine with it being in the film.
I'm uncertain with it mostly because this story is getting told from the perspective of Macy or whatever, and she doesn't seem to know that the bus driver made it out based on what she's telling. So the fact that, like, the narrative is following her words and then it shows something that's not part of her words is, like, a little jarring, I guess. But ultimately I'm fine with it.
Yeah, that's kind of my same sentiment too. And so whenever she gets done telling the story, that's whenever she's like, oh yeah, we're going to pay our respects to these kiddos, which is why we've grabbed this many jack-o'-lanterns. And you know something's up whenever she gets in the elevator and she's like, sorry, we can only fit 3, even though there's clearly enough room for others.
She's
but
like,
again,
safely.
yeah, but then again, the first time I watched it, just went over my head. I'm like, oh, okay, there's no room. Maybe the pumpkins are taking up space. And so then whenever Rhonda and Chip go down, and like Chip is like terrified of going out there because they hear like screaming and everything, and then you see like in the fog the jack-o'-lantern lights go out and out, which again I think it's a clever visual thing to kind of show like what happens, but it's even more clever on how that plays later on in the story. But I do like how also Rhonda isn't afraid to go out exploring first, because again she loves Halloween, and so she's like, well, no, I'm gonna make sure they're okay, and I go out there. And I do like how they show like the mask are floating from the other kiddos there, implying that they got dragged in, which then reveals 3 zombie kids, rising up and then chasing Rhonda. And again, Rhonda's terrified because even if you love horror, you'd be terrified in that situation there. Yeah. And so she's trying to run, and then, loses her glasses amidst everything, and then ends up like falling backwards and hitting her head. And then when she wakes up, Schrader's the one to be like, hey, sorry, it was just a prank. Just a prank, bro.
Right.
And again, it's like one of those things that like, I know kids can definitely be that mean. They could be horribly mean, but just to go through that much effort, you really so have to.
It was too much. There was even a point where I was like, this is a joke, like this is a prank they're pulling on them, but then like it went on so long, it was like, there's no way these kids are like doing all this for a prank.
Yeah.
And then it was a prank, and I was like, oh, well, fooled me, I guess. But...
Yeah, exactly. But I do... Again, I do like how they do add humanity to Schrader, because like once that he sees that she's really freaked out and hitting his head. But again, it kind of makes it waver. I think he's just one of those people that just kind of folds in once again. He's just like, yeah, fine, just want to stick with the cool group or whatever. But he does have like a reason to finally just be like, no, okay, this is really messed up what we did. We're calling it off.
Right.
Let's just take her back home. This has gone terribly bad. And so then they're picking up the pumpkins. But I do feel like, again, Macy, yeah, I think that's her name. Macy, once it's revealed that it was all a prank, she just turns into like super just like hateful and sniffy there. And
super bitch mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like her real personality. You can tell the whole time she's been putting on like this. Yeah, we're getting pumpkins for UNICEF, and yeah, Rhonda, come with us, so that she could pull a prank, and she's actually just this bitch.
Yeah, I mean, and if that's the case, I could perhaps maybe see her doing this because she has nothing better else to do than to torment others.
Spiteful and
because even with the jack-o'-lantern, it's like, oh hey, this one's still lit, and she's like, like kicks it in the water.
Yeah. Which I do love, because like I feel like this kind of spells out that point that the first little intro story kind of made, but was like a little sneaky. And then this one, Rhonda directly is like, when Chip's scared in the elevator, she's like, stay with the jack-o'-lanterns, like they'll keep you safe or whatever.
Which I find really interesting there, that again, because she's so obsessed with Halloween, that she also kind of knows the rules. She knows the rules,
yeah, and you can see that she's the kind of person that would know the rules, because like Chip earlier when they were walking to the quarry, he's like, so you like Halloween? And she's like, you mean Samhain? Also known as All Hallows Eve? And she like rattles off like the Wikipedia page entry. She's like, yeah.
No, yeah, that was a really good moment too, because they could have easily just cut to Rock Quarry, but again, they just need to kind of, again, give like, add more to the mysticism there without feeling like you're getting major exposition. Right. It just helps kind of, again, add depth to this universe there.
And kind of make you care about the characters, but also get each of their motivations, and you get why Schrader is like sympathetic to her, but you also get why people think she's weird, Yeah,
for sure. And I feel like that's a really hard line, because it could have easily just made her just unrealistically annoying or weird, and then you're just like even creeped out. But no, you definitely acknowledge she's definitely different, but you could tell like she just really likes Halloween.
I do think it's interesting. There's a couple things that are kind of going on in the back, like just at the exposition or just on the dialogue level, I guess, where like this was made in 2007, and so a lot of them are kind of throwing out like the R word,
Yeah.
And then of course they approach Rhonda's house and they call her an idiot savant.
Yeah.
they're like, is she a retard? And they're like, no, she's an idiot savant or whatever. Like, oh, okay, like whatever. And so you can tell people are sort of callous about these issues and like don't have a lot of respect. But then it's funny that they have all this sort of language going on because the whole story and the prank that they're centered on is about a short bus full of special kids that was driven off a cliff, and then because they were sort of tormenting somebody on that sort of spectrum, it then goes back to haunt them, and then literally the actual zombie kids rise from the lake and kill them because I mean indirectly but also directly because they were bullying a person that's probably on the spectrum,
Well, and I like the way that they did it because again, there's a lot of things I like. Like one of the things I do also like is whenever it came to like the kids pretending to be alive, and again, like whenever, even though Rhonda tells Chip to like wait there, he's obviously in on the prank, and so he's pretended like he's getting eaten. That the costumes and effects look like cheap if you really pause and look at it, but at the moment you just kind of accept it for what it is and buy into it. Because
you're kind of seeing Rhonda's perspective of like, oh fuck, and then it reveals later that those intestines were actually sausage links, and
yeah, and especially if she loses her glasses, it's just blurred, and so she's just seeing shapes and everything. So I thought that was really well done, and how they had the jack-o'-lanterns blown out, because they basically blew out their own jack-o'-lanterns before Halloween just to play a prank, and then that leaves only like one jack-o'-lantern.
The elevator was full of jack-o'-lanterns, right? Because they needed 8, so they each were carrying one, and then the rest were in the elevator.
Right.
So there were several in the elevator still that were lit, but it wasn't until the last one on the shore or whatever was kicked out that the actual dead kids from the lake. I thought that was like a really good touch, but I am surprised that it was just the kids rising up, and whether blowing out the candles, that's what made the kids rise up, or if Sam had anything to do, because he's at the top.
Yeah, he's at the top, and so that's just what makes it interesting, and so I'm guessing they're all kind of coordinated with one another.
And because we'll get into this in the next story too. That kind of happens in the final story as well, where like you don't know. Because like Sam doesn't really kill the dude at the end, but then at the end he opens the door and all the drowned kids are there, and Sam was just there. So like, did Sam bring them to him, or is he just like, you're on your own with these guys?
Yeah, that definitely makes it questionable. But I do like that whenever the zombie kids are getting attacked, that basically the way they're able to capture them, like whenever they first grab Sarah, because she has those chains, because they were chained up. I thought that was a really clever way, and it snags on one of the rocks in the rock quarry and allows the kids just to pull her in, and so I thought that was a really well done scene. But I also like the fact that whenever Rhonda's in the elevator and they're basically begging for their lives there, that again Rhonda is really thinking it over, and so I don't know about you, but I definitely was not expecting her to press the up button and just be like, bye.
Bye. Yeah, I knew she was... I could have gone either way. I was like, she might do it.
Because even like with Schrader, because he did show bits of humanity and sympathy for her, you would think that would be enough to warrant him safety. But she's like, no. It
was almost like she was like, I can't save you from this. Like, I'm here. I've got my jack-o'-lanterns. I'm good. If I open the door, I don't know what I'm going to let in. So, like, see you guys. Yeah.
And I love that she's just silent the entire time. There.
It's like she's doing her duty. Like, okay, I'm aware of this situation because I love Halloween so much or whatever. Like,
and so you don't feel like she's a bad person either necessarily.
It's like whenever Squidward's getting beat up by the sea bear, and she's like, I've got my circle. I've got the sea bear circle. I tried to tell you guys, but you're on your own, Squidward.
Yeah. So I think like overall it was a pretty factory ending, but one of my favorite shots of the film, again, the cinematography in this film is wonderful, is like, you know, they focus on the elevator arriving up there. It's like one still shot. You just see the elevator move up, and she just moves out slowly with a jack-o'-lantern. And whenever she walks out, she looks across, and then Sam's just in the field in like one of like the water pipes, and they're just staring at each other, not saying anything. You don't know if they know each other or anything there, but she just puts the pumpkin in the wagon and just starts pulling it and walking away. And then Sam starts walking towards the quarry. You assume she's going home. You don't know where Sam's going.
Right.
Sam's walking towards the quarry, so like maybe he has more stuff to do, and maybe he does help the zombie kiddos out.
That's kind of what I thought after the end of the film.
But yeah, it does. I do love it, because the other thing is like, you know, she's obsessed with Halloween, and the thing that's interesting about Sam is some people just overlook him and don't actually see him, and then others actually do see him and acknowledge him,
Right.
and he's there. So it just makes it very interesting on whether he's there or not. It's just very interesting on how that works out. And so that's like one of my favorite moments in the film, is whenever Rhonda looks over and Sam's staring at her, and then
And she's
just
not like scared. Yeah, she just
No.
keeps walking.
she's just very like just
It's like she recognizes, like, okay, that's the spirit of Halloween or whatever.
yeah, maybe, or just like just a kid's just standing there. She's like, okay, but I
Right.
think because she didn't say anything and walked away, I think you're definitely more correct on the fact that she did recognize something about Sam, and so that's like just one of my favorite moments. I think is so beautifully and well done, and helps wrap up that story. As opposed to this next story, which I rated the weakest out of the four.
The girls.
Yep, the girls group.
We've already kind of touched on this one. I feel like we don't even need to talk about it that much. But
Not too much, because basically, whenever Laurie's having issues trying to find somebody, you know, and her sister's calling her like, hey, you know, I have this one guy, he'll do. And she's like,
it's a big
oh, thanks.
frumpy dude.
Yeah, exactly, in a baby outfit.
Yeah. But he's nice.
He's nice, so you mean he's hideous. But then that's whenever she recognizes this individual cloaked in a black cloak and a black hood there, which you see him earlier kill this woman, because he has a set of fangs, which again, the first time I watched it, I was like, what the heck is this? Is this vampires now? Do we have vampires? Because again, he bites the neck of this woman and then clearly kills her. She's like covered in blood. And I love the way that he decided to, like, you know, again, place her body amongst the drunks there. And she's covered in blood, which they already established early. A lot of people are covered in blood, so they don't think anything about it because it's Halloween. But you see this individual, and then you see this individual find Laurie, and then you're like, oh, Laurie's his next victim for sure. And so then, you know, you see her like walking to the party because she's like, whatever, I'm just going to go to this party. And this dude confronts her and is basically going in to kill, you know, like biting her. And then it cuts back to the party, and then they're like, where's Laurie? She should be here right now. And then you see like this like body wrapped in a red cloak that you assume to be Laurie. But then as it's revealed, it's the stalker.
Well, it was a Red Riding Hood, because that's who she was dressed as, was Little Red Riding Hood. And so you see this, which is important.
Yes, and I thought that was clever, a bit on the nose, but just
It's
like
a little bit of a meme. Yeah,
a little bit of a meme, but I enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah, so
but
the cloak falls down, body. They're like, Laurie, and they unveil the hood, and it's the dude in the mask, the vampire dude.
Yeah, and so my thing is like, I'm guessing because then you find out later that Laurie's the one that dealt with him, because I thought that it was just like he was stashed up in the trees or something, but I'm assuming he just got thrown.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's what I assumed. Look, because I thought the same thing, that he like fell from the tree somehow or whatever, and I was like, what the fuck? But no, this party is in the middle of the woods, turns out, around a fire, and the body was in, and they take off. First, there's like a series of weird reveals. First, they kind of open his mouth while he's still alive and like his leg's broken or whatever, and take out his teeth. It's like, okay, so he wasn't really a vampire. It was just some dude with fake teeth killing people. And then they take off his mask, and they're like, "What's your name?" And he says his name is the principal.
Steven. Yeah. This is the thing earlier. I didn't even realize because I was looking at the IMDb and I'm like, Steven, and I'm like, that's weird. He looks like the principal. And I'm like, but I know Steven's the dude at the end. And then Aaron had to explain to me, like, no, they're the same. And I'm like, how did I miss that?
Yeah.
I call it the Clark Kent effect. Like, if they don't have glasses on, I have no idea who they are.
Yeah. Well, no, it's definitely him. He's he says his full name, and it's the name that he used earlier in the principal bit. But also, crucially, in the principal story, he's like, his kid wants to go to the parade. And he's like, no, I've got a date. And was his date, presumably, was that he's going to the parade on a date, quote unquote, and it was, killing women and sucking their blood. But
Yeah, which I thought was also a clever way, because they could have easily made this a nameless character, but the fact that it was the principal, I thought, is really ingenious. So that I just had the biggest brain fart whenever I put two and two together.
So he ultimately did get his punishment for killing people on Halloween. But
yeah, because as it's revealed, this party is a feast, more like, and the fact that Laurie's a virgin is the fact that she has never feasted upon a person before, and I feel like I like the idea of it, but the way they conveyed it is just goofy and uncomfortable.
It was a little too M. Night Shyamalan twist for me, you know what I mean? It was a little too like, ooh, big reveal, virgin. It was in quotes the whole time, It's like they were like, okay, if they were talking like normal people, that wouldn't have been a twist. But
yeah, and so like that was the hints that I was talking about was all in that story there.
Right.
It's just like, look, it doesn't matter who it is, just find somebody.
Right, and she's like, no, but I want it to be special, and they're like, ugh,
Yeah, and so, like, watching it a second time round, it's just like every time they threw that, because I knew the twist, it was like a softball hitting me, just, and there was quite a few softballs, but, I mean, as is, I still feel like the story is fine, but still is kind of weird, just kind of, because I did not expect the werewolf thing. By a long shot.
Yeah, they all transform into werewolves, which is why it's kind of funny that she was Little Red Riding Hood the whole time.
Yeah.
And also probably why they were laughing at her costume, because at the beginning, like, all these girls are laughing at her costume, and you think it's because she's, like, not dressed as slutty as them, because they have their kind of tits out and she doesn't, and they're like, okay, don't laugh, and they're like, but, like, looking back on it, it's probably because they're like, you're Little Red Riding Hood, and we're werewolves, so we're gonna eat people.
Yes, yeah, definitely, probably the case there. Which again, I feel like that was more of the well hidden ones, because that could easily be perceived as just like you look silly,
right
there. But yeah, the other hints were definitely a lot more hard hitting. But I do like the story a little bit better now that you told me it was the principal, because I felt like that was an effective use of the character as opposed to other horror films where it's like, why do this with this character whenever you could have done this? I thought that was well done. And again, kind of shows, his comeuppance. He doesn't quite get away with it.
Right. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, did Sam have a hand in that or not? Because Sam is at the party. And nobody's really... I guess they kind of look at him, but they don't really acknowledge him. But because I don't think they care that he's there, because they know that he's in the spirit of Halloween.
Yeah, and I feel like whenever it came to the werewolf transformation scenes... obviously, it's hard to beat An American Werewolf in London. Like, I know, even though you didn't like love the film too much, you at least like that one scene.
Yeah.
This transformation scene, I wasn't quite as big of a fan of, because it's like them peeling off their skin.
I do think it was interesting, because a lot of werewolf transformations just like, oh, I'm getting hairy and my bones are moving or whatever, but. And some of them are really cool and neat, like in American Werewolf in London, where it looks painful and it looks like a transformation,
Yeah.
But I do like that they did something different, where they're literally like peeling off skin inside out, like. But it does leave a lot more questions than answers.
Yes, like how did they turn into a woman there, or like they find another like.
So they have to. Were these just because it kind of hints like. I don't know. I guess one could come to the conclusion that these were just like skin suits they were wearing, which would be really stupid. If
it would be. But then again, it's like shows them being very fleshy.
Right.
Whenever they rip it off, which again, I think I think it's a little bit goofy because seeing like the skin fall off, it's like very kind of like rubbery
Right.
looking there, and then you have Marilyn Manson's take of Sweet Dreams.
Yeah,
It
it's a kind of goofy track, and it hasn't aged well, I guess. But
Yeah, but again, I feel like for the story, it's still fine. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't ruin it, but it definitely the first time I watched it, I'm like, what am I watching there? I do like how much they emphasize like Lori going through the transformation there,
Mhm.
focusing on that, but it is a lot of goofy stuff. I didn't even know about this, but did you see like whenever they're dragging like bodies because they reveal to Steven like all the boys they brought to the party are dead, that the hot dog costume
I
was
did
there?
see the hot dog costume, yeah.
Apparently, I didn't even know this. I honestly was like looking up stuff and I only found out later. But the drunk teacher in the catsuit, she was a werewolf.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess she's in a very background though, and
that's
so
funny.
don't know. So I thought that was a
did
funny
notice
touch.
In retrospect, they used a funny turn of phrase earlier where Lori wasn't at the party yet, and they were like waiting for her, and the two sidekick girls are like,
Yeah.
"Okay, Lori's an adult, like she'll figure it on her own."
Yeah.
And the main girl's like, "I don't know. Mom always said she was the runt of the litter." Like,
Yeah, that's stuck.
in retrospect, it's like,
yeah, exactly. Second time watching it, I'm like, oh, that is.
So they have little hints like that. But...
yeah, stuff like that. But it's funny because that one stuck out to me.
And I do
so
like
much.
I do like that they're all dressed as fairy tale characters too. Not because like I thought at first like, are these like all Disney princesses or something? But they're all sort of dressed as fairy tale like iconic fairy tale characters, which is fine, other than werewolves, which are fairy tale characters.
That's actually a really good observation. Like I recognize each of them, but I didn't really put the fairy tale. I obviously
one's
knew.
Little Bo Peep, one's Little Red Riding Hood, one's Snow White. Wait,
it's Little Bo Peep, Snow White, and Cinderella.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like I knew the Red Riding Hood was a lot more on the nose there, but yeah, the fact they're all fairy tale characters, I think, was definitely a really good thematic choice. But yeah, and so like I don't hate the wolf transformation scene. I just not sure how to feel about it there because like I said, it is very jarring because you see the typical tropes there, like the eyes changing, the teeth growing in, like the spine protruding more. I will say once they finally turn, while I do love the use of practical effects, that wolf is so goofy looking.
They are, yeah.
Like, and I could tell they definitely kind of use their budget more in other places there. But as is, I feel like it served fine. But yeah, it is definitely weird seeing Sam just sit there, just kind of taking this all in. And again, you assume he's probably you don't know what he's thinking behind the mask there. You don't know if he's enjoying it or just observing or anything. But overall, like, even though it is the weakest story, for me personally, I still think there's a lot to enjoy and get from this story overall there. And so, while because it does take up a big chunk of the film, but I definitely think if they hadn't taken the time to do so, it would have fallen more flat.
Yeah.
So, major kudos for properly pacing that story to where it was enjoyable, just definitely very unexpected ending. Like, didn't see it coming a mile away, but now knowing about it, like, there were small hints of something to be had. But yeah, and unless you had other stuff about the other stories there, I'm going to talk about Krieg.
Nope, that's the only one.
So yeah, so the final story that we get pretty much is focusing on Krieg, who we see earlier with the principal. He lives next door. You could tell he's just a big curmudgeon, stays in his home the entire time, likes to prank, I wouldn't say prank. He likes to scare kids in hopes that they'll drop their candy, and so he'll come in and just kind of be a freeloader and eat candy. And again, you see him flipping through TV. You could tell he has a miserable existence, doesn't care about anything anymore. He's like burning photos just in the fire just because he's like, well, I don't care about this anymore. I don't want to think about it. But I do love that they do have like small details they give about his character and how they play stuff. Like whenever he's eating the candy, he eats one of the candy bars, he's like, ugh, which I could definitely see an adult doing there. They're just like, this is gross. And I also love that he has a bird cage in his house, even though he clearly does not have a bird.
Oh,
That just
I didn't
seems
notice that.
like something like a person that just lives in their home forever would have. Like, I used to
Right.
have a bird, didn't get it died, and I just kept it around.
Right.
So I thought that's like one of those small things I didn't notice the first time around, but second time around I'm like, that's really interesting. They
Mhm.
deliberately chose to have a birdhouse there,
That's funny.
bird cage. But then you find out that he has a visitor, which again you hear at the beginning of the film, like, tell your kid to stay out of my yard.
Right.
And then turns out that little kid is Sam,
Mhm.
which I do love. One of the ways he gets at Krieg is he throws an egg at the house with such a force it cracks the windshield there.
Mhm.
Because egging houses, yeah, you see it a lot on Halloween there,
Yeah.
but just the fact that it was done with a sheer force to shatter glass also shows his otherworldliness.
Mhm.
So I definitely like that a ton. I do like how the dog is the one to kind of alert that something's at the door there, as opposed to like the usual creak or noise there.
Mhm.
But it's like, how animals can sense things. So I thought that was a really well done thing. And then whenever the dog runs upstairs and you hear like a whimper, you're like, uh-oh, whatever's here is upstairs. And I do love the reveal of him going into the room, which is dark, and then you see something like moving underneath the sheets, and he grabs his shotgun over the fireplace,
Mhm.
and he has a shotgun that he got from the fireplace, which he again mentions at the beginning of the film. He's like, I got a shotgun over the fireplace.
Got an NRA membership in my pocket and a shotgun over the fire ship.
It was such a good line.
Mhm.
But then whenever he pulls it back, it's like one of those like little animatronic hands, you see at like, box stores, like little
Mhm.
Halloween decorations. And then I love the fact that there's a jack-o'-lantern that's carved in the background that just suddenly just shoots up in flames, which lights up the room, which shows on the wall like trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat, like written in blood. And it's just revealed in that way because otherwise it was too dark to kind of see.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden you hear like a slashing noise as Krieg's ankle is cut there. And then it has the reveal that, oh look, it's Sam coming to pay him a visit there. And I love his weapons of choice. I think they are super creative. That's one of my favorite things about Sam, is the fact that you find out that the thing he slashed Krieg with was a candy bar with a razor inside.
Right.
And I just thought that was well done. Because, I mean, obviously you've heard, like, of the mythos of putting razors of candy. We even talked about it the last episode where one of the kids had eaten a candy with razor in there. But the fact that he actually made it a weapon of choice, I thought, like, okay, that's just really smart.
Yeah.
And brilliant. So I really like that a ton. And I like that whenever he tries to shoot Sam, he, like, disappears. So you're like, okay, where did he go? It's not just a regular kid there. So then later on, whenever he's kind of freaked out and he's like, I need to get out of here, he slips on the stairs because there's a whole bunch of like candy. And again, I was like, okay, this is just really clever. I think like out of all the stories, I truly think Michael probably had the most fun writing for this one.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like, okay, I have the spirit of Halloween. How would he terrorize somebody there? And
It's like candied stuff at the top of the stairs, and then it's still candy at the bottom. But I love that it's like mixed in with razor blades and broken glass.
yeah, that was so good. Like he was just thinking everything through because his hands are all messed up, which is why then he has trouble undoing all the locks. Which again, you understand why he does. I don't ever feel like it's a cheap shot. I feel like there's an actual good explanation for all of the actions to follow suit.
Right.
And I do love whenever he's trying to, unlock the doors, you just see in the very background Sam's head pop over like the little wall edge that you see on a lot of staircases where it's like ceiling and then it cuts away to make room for the stairs.
Yeah.
And then you just slowly see Sam crawling on the ceiling close to him. I will say it did throw me off a little bit because Sam's size changes quite a bit there, where it's like you could tell like Sam grew a bit there and then shrinks down to a smaller size, which I'm sure it's like stunt people stepping in, and again, like they probably had a hard time, finding, an actor to play Sam and just have experience being body double. But yeah, the Sam and force that he has definitely kind of makes it like, okay, it takes me out a little bit, but I totally get it. And so Sam just basically um, having add Krieg there until Krieg finally knocks him off and finally hits him with a shotgun, which I was very surprised that. Well, actually, even before then, he somehow rips the mask off, right?
Yeah, he's kind of clawing with him and
Mm-hmm.
fighting with him, and he grabs his hand, kind of makes a tear in the burlap sack, and he like rips it off.
Yeah, which reveals that Sam underneath that burlap sack is a big pumpkin head.
Yeah, he's got a big old pumpkin head.
Yeah, and I think it just looks goofy. And I've seen in stores on Blu-ray cases where they have like Sam's like real true identity on the case, and I hate it.
Yeah,
Because it's not as striking
corny
of an
looking.
image as a burlap sack. Again, I'm fine with the idea of it. It's just comparing the two.
Right.
It's like if you were making Friday the 13th, film, and you just put Jason without his mask on there,
Yeah,
or Michael without his mask. Like it just doesn't. It doesn't make me as quite excited as the actual mask does.
I agree. But
But-
I like the concept enough because that's what makes his head so big and round or whatever with the burlap sack on. So I like that it's a pumpkin underneath, especially if he's the spirit of Halloween. But
Exactly.
yeah, just the way they like affected it. They used effects to make him look scary or whatever, like a slightly rotting pumpkin.
Yeah,
It just looks goofy.
Yeah, it definitely looked goofy. Didn't look scary there to me. But it does, again, lead to a funny moment whenever Krieg finally throws Sam off his back and blasts him with the shotgun with such a force that he just slides backwards into a wall. And one of my favorite things about him is, as we come to find out, whenever Krieg actually makes a smart decision, as opposed to every other horror character,
And I love
double
that
tap.
I love that he's not a dumbass. He like goes it. He approaches him. He reloads his shotgun, shoots him twice again, and like his hand falls off, and like pumpkin guts spill out, and he's like, "Okay, cool, he's dead." And then he calls the police, or he tries to, but turns out Sam's hand is still alive, I guess, and cuts the phone wire, and then there's a whole scene with that. But I do love that Krieg is not a dumbass and made smart decisions.
Yeah, because they could have easily done the like, oh yeah, well, they're dead. But no, he's like, no, double tapped,
Right.
And I love that Sam is made out of pumpkin guts. Like, they could have easily just made it like more bloody, but just the fact that they specifically gave it that same texture that you see the inside of pumpkins have, like that stringy pumpkin seedy.
I love the strings. Yeah, because the hand eventually comes back and reattaches to the body, like the strings like attach and pull his
Yeah,
hand
because
back
it's
in.
like it does almost remind you of tendons, like whenever you're
Right.
carving pumpkins there. So I really like how how similar pumpkin guts are to tendons, like that
Yeah.
muscle strands. And so I think it's just brilliant. I feel like Michael really took a lot of time when coming up with this movie about how Sam is as a character, because they could have easily just like half-assed it and not done anything, but they took the time to do that, and I love that. And then again, whenever he's reattaching there, Krieg is pretty much beaten up pretty badly because the hand also like slashed at him again. And so then whenever Sam's getting back up, and then he puts the mask on, it's like the final finish him sort of thing, because Krieg is basically at wit's end. He doesn't know what to do. He's basically back to the corner because he's out of ammo, as he shows, which I believe that.
Yeah.
It's not like one of those like, oh come on. And so then he's backed into a corner, and then knocks his tray over, and then his alcohol bottle he then smashes, and he's like, well fine, I'm going to use this as a weapon. And then Sam has enough strength just to almost break, well, he actually does break his arm, pinning it back there. Oh, and I do love, like, before he even arrives, he pulls out his lollipop there and just takes a bite, and then that's his new weapon he's finishing off with. And while I do like the idea of what they were going with, I'm not sure how to feel about it, is the fact that whenever he goes in for the stab, he hits the candy bar instead on the chest, pulls it back there, and then takes a bite, and then he's just like, never mind, you're good.
He's like, I don't care.
It's like one of those things that's like, okay, did he do that because that technically counts as him receiving candy because it was from somebody else? because I also do like the fact that if they were going that route, Krieg isn't like, oh, here, take candy, because you wouldn't bribe a killer with candy.
Right.
That's just not in your nature there whatsoever. Or 2, if Sam does it because he's like, no, your fate's already sealed. Or 3, you learned your lesson. It's like so mysterious on why.
I agree. It kind of leaves it up for viewer interpretation, but I think it kind of shows that Sam's kind of childlike. I think because like obviously he's childlike. He's like a little kid in pajamas or whatever. But it seems even his mentality is childlike. I think is just like. Oh, trick or treat. Yeah, you got me. I got a treat. Have fun, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not gonna and so, Krieg learns his lesson. It's like, okay, I will do the Halloween things. That's I guess he picked up that lesson somewhere in the middle of fighting for his life. And is just kind of looking at Sam as Sam looks at him across the yard when he's like giving out peppermints to trick-or-treaters because that's all he has in his house.
Yeah, I thought that was good. And one thing I want to tap before getting to like the final part of the film there is I'm curious on what you think about this. I need to ask you because you seem to have picked up even more than what I did the first time I watched it. But with going back to the trick-or-treater's house, Rhonda says that she did all those pumpkins, like all those numerous pumpkins.
Yeah.
And then you see outside Krieg's house there are numerous pumpkins,
Right.
which Sam did. But that does raise the question, like there were so many pumpkins there. Is Rhonda actually in working with Sam? And that's why, because it seemed very similar.
Yeah, it was definitely a very similar setup, but I think it was I think it was more so showing that setup of Rhonda's and being like she's doing this to keep herself safe or whatever, and then showing that it's same setup in front of Krieg, and then him being kind of safe. I don't know. It kind of breaks its own rules there because he's not really safe because he's getting attacked by Sam. But Sam's the one that put all the pumpkins there.
Yeah, it's very interesting on why. I mean, again, he did steal candy, but I'm guessing it makes me question on why all the pumpkins are there. It does make for a cool shot there, and he technically doesn't snuff out any of the lights.
Right.
There, so that's the only kind of bad thing is with Trick or Treat. It, even though it tries to establish rules, it's very loose with its rules. But yeah, I was curious on that because both Krieg's house ended up looking very similar to Rhonda's house, and then the fact that Rhonda looked at Sam, and we don't know if, we assume she probably knows who Sam is, if that had any correlation there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think the movie gives us enough to say definitively one way or another. But it's something to think about. Yeah.
No, definitely. And I was just curious. I wasn't trying to dive in solely into that, but it was just a quick passing by thought there.
Yeah, it's a good observation.
One of my other favorite things, jumping back to the final story as we wrap this up, I love that whenever Sam's leaving with the candy bar, the door magically swings open and then just closes.
Right.
There. I really like that a ton because that's another thing with like Trick or Treat. The door plays a pivotal part there, so I think it just adds to that mysticism and the fact that if he does have these force powers, he doesn't really ever use it too much.
Right.
But I do love the fact that you pointed out that he still has a childlike mind because again, you could easily bribe a kid with candy there. So I think that's just another good point of like, okay, I got a treat from you. I'm good now.
Right, and I think it's also like. His crimes, quote unquote, against Halloween was like in that moment at least was he took the candy from the trick-or-treaters. He took their candy, and so Sam comes and starts playing a prank on him. They throw in the egg and then attacking him or whatever. But then he gets that candy he stole back because he didn't want to eat it, and it was left on his chest, and so he took the candy back. And he's like, oh, okay, well I guess the right is wrong. You know what I mean? Or the wrong is righted.
Yeah, and so, like, with that final story, it does lead to, like, another one of my favorite shots. There's a lot of shots I love in this film. Seriously, it's ridiculous. But, like, whenever, again, Krieg, like, again, like, the trick-or-treaters are really nice. And they're like, thanks, Mr. Krieg. I really like your mummy costume, which is funny because he's all bandaged up.
Right.
But then he looks across the street, and so you see the couple returning back from the party. You see Steven, the principal's kiddo, on the porch, dressed up similar to him, which kind of shows what I assume to be more of an illusion that he's going to take his father's place and do the same thing. And just that's what I would assume, because I don't know why else he would be dressed up exactly like it. Yeah. It is a little goofy that even he has the glasses and the stuff. It does make you question why and what that blood stain.
Right.
But I think it's symbolically supposed to be like he's now taken his place, just like his father before him.
Right.
You know, it's just like a family of serial killers, I guess.
Which makes sense, because there's kind of a line that alludes to that Steven says or something. It's like, my grandfather said, or my dad said, or whatever, that Halloween was you're supposed to follow the rules or whatever. So I think he does mention like a traditions being passed on kind of thing.
So I thought that was very clever of them to do, even if it is kind of cheesy. And I think that was the only way you would get that, I think.
Yeah.
You know, there. But I love how it's basically Krieg looking at all the stories finally getting to their conclusion. And it all is meeting up in the same place. Because then you see Rhonda with her wagon coming down. And again, it's revealed, obviously, that we're pretty much towards the start of the film.
Right, because at the very beginning, you see her go off the curb with her wagon, and a car slams on its brakes in front of it, or whatever. But then at the end, it reveals that's Rhonda with the wagon, and that's the car full of werewolf girls at the end.
You know, just raving on about like how successful the party was. And then you just see Sam just looking at Krieg. And so you don't know what Sam is thinking.
He's like observing him giving out candy or whatever.
Yeah, but then it isn't until like the girl across the street, the wife, blows out the candle that Sam's like, okay, I got business to settle.
Right.
Yeah, I even love how he looks down at his sucker and just looks back up again like, all right, time to go to work.
Right.
And so I feel like it's a pretty satisfactory end. And then whenever he closes the door and hears a knock, I love... Brian Cox did such a good job as Mr. Krieg. I feel like did a very good job. But his expression of like, oh my God, what is that now? Because he could have easily been like, oh, what now? Or completely oblivious. But he's like, so much weird stuff has happened. I am uncomforted at that. And then whenever he opens his door, surprise, it's all the zombie kiddos from the bus. Which, I don't know how to feel about it. I feel like overall, like, the kids showing up and everything, and then they say trick or treat. I feel like it's a good way, again, to wrap up the story. Because, again, it's him getting his comeuppance. Because he basically was going to kill 8 kids.
Right, because it kind of shows back to one of the photos he burned and shows that he was the bus driver.
Yes, that is the big reveal there, which again, I thought that was just clever though they did it, because it's not like he would frame something like that. It's probably just old photos he have. He's like, I'm burning all this. It doesn't matter.
He's probably been a recluse, just living off of the money that he got from killing all those kids, and is like, scraping by, and probably feels the guilt of it or whatever, and then just living with his dog, and then he finally opens the door. It has to come face to face to what he did 30 years ago.
And I do like the fact that they cut to black whenever it's just him in the realization, and all the kids do is say like, trick or treat, that, and then it cuts back to the comic panel of like them getting attacked, and then quickly rolls the credits, because that's like my comparison with the Dawn of the Dead remake versus Trick or Treat, is that I felt like Dawn of the Dead was, the reason that bothers me more is the fact that I felt like it was a slap to the face because these people tried so hard to survive. Whereas this one, I feel like it's just like him getting his comeuppance. Like, yeah, makes sense. And the fact that it was a lot shorter, because like it cuts back to the comic panels, which I actually kind of like that they did that. As well as actually seeing the kids attack him. It's just comic panels there and shows silhouettes there, changing it up, and then it just rolls straight into credits. I love that they did that as opposed to Dawn of the Dead, where it just really just focuses in like, yep, they're still attacking. So I felt like it had a really good start to the film and really good end. And that's really hard for a story to do, because a lot of times you can have the idea for the beginning and end, and then the middle parts kind of really get mushy and stuff. But I felt like it was just a consistent string all the way throughout this film. So I thought it was just very well done and well wrapped up. So that was a whole lot of talking. Aaron, was there any other points or thoughts you wanted to talk about with Trick or Treat?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we went through it pretty exhaustively. I love little Sam. I think the Pumpkinhead was a little goofy, but overall I like him. I like how he was included as like he's not even really a villain. Like, he kills people, but you're not, like, ever rooting against him. Like, you know, maybe in the very beginning, but even then, most of the people that die are like, yeah, you deserve that. And it's an interesting case of a movie that really leans into you cheering for the killers rather than the victims, you know what I mean? And it's like, because a lot of horror movies, it's like, okay, you're supposed to kind of like the victims a little bit, even though you might think the killers are really cool, you still kind of want them to survive because they didn't do nothing, you know what I mean? But this one, everybody kind of deserved to die, and you're not sad to see them go. You're kind of rooting for the killers and for the spirit of Halloween.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I was thinking about that, because definitely in the slashers, you know, you do tend to root for the killer, but in this one, you don't root for the killer because
they're cool or whatever.
Yeah, or like, again, that the people are slightly annoying. No, they're pretty terrible people. They're definitely pretty terrible, and while it does range on how bad of what they did is, you know, I mean, just the fact, like, whether it's just playing a prank there or murdering people. Yeah. It definitely has a huge range there, but I do love that. I do feel like this film really, again, just, I don't know, it has a good judgment system, I feel like, for the most part, because I don't feel like anybody at the end of the film who's alive necessarily, you know, deserve to die. I feel like justice has been delivered. There might be some people that died that, you know, maybe shouldn't have died, and, you know, maybe, who knows, like, with the werewolves there, like, maybe they're the ones that get away kind of scotch-free, but again, they're kind of like, they're wolves, they feed.
Right.
That's what it is. They don't really do it because they're hateful, they just do it because wolves gotta eat.
And they're also sort of like, it turns the moralistic story on its head, because, like, that's kind of what I thought it was going for, is like, in the beginning, when you don't know they're werewolves yet, it's like, okay, they're gonna get punished because they're sluts. But it ended up being the opposite, where it's like the people that died were horny guys that were like, oh yeah, I'll go to the party with you, and then they didn't realize they're getting werewolfed on. So it was like kind of the horny dudes that were getting punished at the end.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head right there with that comment. I feel like it definitely feels it definitely feels like those that make, you know, moralistically poor decisions will get their comeuppance there. And it's not even just like, oh, having sex or smoking pot,
right,
like we see in a lot of films there, where they're more like just target practice. It's like people that basically are disrespectful to Halloween will die. That's the universe there. And I feel like, again, just the name Trick or Treat is also just a perfect one, even with a little R there and one tiny little small sprinkle to add. I love that the credits are orange.
Yeah,
I like it. They definitely could have stuck to white, but no, they did orange, and so major kudos. So I think that should, I mean, all that said, we both definitely recommend you watch this film. If you have not seen this film, definitely check it out, whether it's you checking it out in theaters or catching it on a streaming service, anything like that. It's the perfect Halloween film. As to how scary it is, I wouldn't say it's like super duper scary.
No, not really. There are moments of suspense, but
it's just more so graphic at points, I would probably say. So definitely, if you're not afraid of that, you definitely need to check out this film. It definitely needs to be on your watch list for Halloween.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this seems like a Halloween movie so through and through, to the effect of, like, you gotta watch, you know, Rudolph or whatever on Christmas because it's just so Christmassy. You gotta watch this one on Halloween. It's just so Halloweeny.
Yeah. It is, like, by far the best Halloween film there is, and fortunately it's just one of my favorite films, period, because it captures it so perfectly for me. So, yeah. I'm finally relieved that I have gotten to talk about this, you know. Super duper excited about it. And how about we go into some teasers for the next episode?
Yeah, you know, get the tweezers. I love me some teasers.
Oh, how about that? Yeah, you got the tongs.
Yeah, this old geezer is looking for a teaser. You know
Ooh, yeah. So with this film, this is actually a film that some of our listeners were surprised that we had not tackled yet. It's like one that says, like, why don't you talk about these films? And I'm not sure. I know it was like a few of my friends. I don't know if you were one of them. I think you might have also added to it there. I think you might have been there whenever we were talking about it, but it's an older film.
Older.
And by older film, let's go back, about 70 years.
Shoo, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely
So
ticking
50s?
ticking it. Oh, well, let me rephrase that. It's almost 90 years from where we're at. 70 years from when Trick or Treat came out.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So yeah, it's it's
Old.
getting to almost 100. Not quite.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely under 90. So we're in that era there,
Mhm.
and whenever it comes to monsters, they're one of the most iconic.
Is it Dracula?
It is Dracula.
Mm.
Yep, we're going to be taking a look at our first Universal monster here. So, real quick, as always, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. I hope you all have a happy Halloween, and we'll see you all again next time when we're popping the scary with Dracula.
Yes, I want to see you there.
Yes, you better be there. If you're not, I will be sad.
I will suck your Venus.
I want to.
I mean blood.
What the fuck? Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.